A little girl came home from school and stayed alone for just a few minutes. But when her parents walked inside, she was already gone. Police officers, together with local residents, searched the entire area for almost 2 weeks. But she had vanished, as if into thin air. Later, this case would take a sudden turn, triggering a chain of events that shocked the entire country. And it eventually became one of the most notorious cases in Canada, a case that remains unforgettable even today. Christine Jessop was born on November 29, 1974, in a small town called Queensville. It was a quiet community near a beautiful lake, home to only about 600 people. Everyone knew each other, and the town was considered very safe. Christine lived with her parents and her older brother, who was 5 years older than she was. She loved playing outside, riding her bike, and she got into baseball because of her brother. She adored animals. Once, a bat flew into her room, and instead of being scared, she wanted to keep it as a pet. On October 3, 1984, 9-year-old Christine woke up early, just like any other school day. Her brother had a terrible toothache, so their mother planned to take him to the dentist. After school, Christine was supposed to stay home alone, something she had done many times before. Before leaving school, she arranged to meet her best friend. When the school bus dropped her off near her home, Christine was supposed to put down her things and head to the park for their meeting. Her friend arrived on time, but Christine never showed up. Later, she went home and tried calling, no answer. When Christine's mother came back with her son, she immediately noticed that Christine wasn't there, but it was obvious that the girl had been home. Her backpack was inside, and the letters from the mailbox had already been brought in. Still, 2 details seemed strange. Her bicycle was lying on the ground with a bent kickstand. Christine never left it like that, and her jacket was hanging on the highest hook, a place she couldn't reach on her own. At first, the mother thought Christine might have gone out to play, as she sometimes did. But an hour passed. Evening came, and the girl still wasn't home. She always told her family where she was going. Her mother began calling Christine's friends. None of them had seen her. Only the best friend mentioned that they had planned to meet, but Christine never arrived. Worried and frightened, her mother went out searching on her own. She checked all of Christine's favorite places, but there was no sign of her. At 7 p.m., she called the police. For the officers, missing child cases were usually resolved very quickly, but this time, everything was different. During the search, they learned that Christine had stopped by a small store between her home and the park, where she bought some gum. After that, her trail disappeared. There were no security cameras back then. Search teams worked through the night, but found nothing. Days went by, and the sense of fear only grew. More and more volunteers joined, but every lead turned out to be false. People reported seeing a little girl, but none of the sightings were confirmed. Soon, police began to suspect that she had been abducted. In such a small town, it was nearly impossible to hide, especially after news of her disappearance spread everywhere. Her mother insisted that Christine would never run away. The police searched the family's home, but did so very carelessly. Many of the girl's belongings were never checked for fingerprints, and dozens of neighbors had walked through the house before investigators arrived, destroying possible evidence. Another important detail: Christine's father was in jail at the time for a minor fraud charge. On the day Christine disappeared, her mother and brother visited him after their dentist appointment. Once police realized the girl had likely been abducted, he was released early and immediately joined the search. Weeks passed, but there were still no clues. The fields and forests around town were searched again and again, all in vain. 3 long months went by. December 31st. While people were preparing for the holidays, a man in the nearby town of Sunderland, about 5 kilometers from Queensville, was walking his dog near a wooded area. He noticed something on the ground that looked like garbage. When he got closer, he realized it was a body. He called the police right away. When officers arrived, they immediately recognized whose child it was. Right beside the body was a small tape recorder with a sticker that said Christine, the one she had received at school on the day she went missing. Part of her clothing, including her pants and underwear, was scattered nearby, indicating sexual assault. Experts confirmed multiple stab wounds, the injuries that caused her death. A foreign biological sample was found on her underwear, but DNA testing at that time simply didn't exist. Investigators believed the girl had not been killed where she was found. Her body had been moved, and the most unusual detail, the killer had transported her nearly 60 kilometers. This made police think the person might have known the area around Sunderland well. But they also didn't rule out that the killer could have lived in Queensville itself and possibly knew the girl. Christine would only approach someone she trusted. Police repeatedly asked the parents whether anyone had ever seemed suspicious, but her mother insisted she couldn't remember anyone like that. Police had questioned nearly every resident in town, looking into people with criminal backgrounds and those who appeared in various tips, but nothing connected anyone to the crime. This continued until February 14th, when detectives returned to speak with the victim's mother again, asking her to recall whether anyone nearby had ever seemed suspicious. This time, she remembered something unusual. Near their home lived the Morans family, a respected household everyone knew. The father owned a small business and was known as a handyman who could fix almost anything. Residents of Queensville often relied on him. He and his wife had 6 adult children, and one of them, 20-year-old Paul, still lived at home. Christine's mother noted a few strange things. After her daughter went missing, Paul never joined the search efforts, even though nearly the entire town helped for weeks. And when the funeral took place, with hundreds of people attending, Paul didn't appear there either. She described him as quiet, somewhat withdrawn, with only a few friends, and spending most of his time alone. He also played the clarinet. That detail caught the detective's attention. On the day Christine disappeared, she had a tape recorder with her. Investigators thought Paul might have used music to start a conversation and lure the girl closer. Christine had known him all her life. Their homes were only meters apart. Detectives went to speak with him and asked how well he knew the victim. Paul said they barely interacted, other than a moment when he once helped her catch a runaway dog. When questioned about his whereabouts that day, he explained that he had been working about 57 kilometers from town until noon, then stopped at a store for groceries, went to a gas station, and arrived home around 5 p.m. When detectives asked what he thought of Christine, he said she was a sweet, ordinary girl, but his odd remark, that sometimes children grow up wrong, left investigators uneasy. It strengthened their suspicions, and they decided to verify his alibi. From his workplace record, they saw he finished his shift at 3:32 p.m. Even if he had driven straight home, he couldn't have arrived before Christine's mother. Further checks confirmed that he truly stopped at the store and gas station, which took about 30 minutes. His relatives also said he returned home around 5 and went to sleep shortly after, tired from work. Based on timing alone, he didn't have enough time to abduct Christine. But detectives believed the family might be mistaken or intentionally protecting him. They requested to search Paul's car and found several fibers in the trunk. Experts reported the fibers were similar to the fabric of Christine's sweater from that day. They also found a few hairs on the girl's body that might have belonged to Paul, though there was no absolute certainty since hair analysis back then was purely visual and unreliable. Police consulted a profiler who reviewed the case and described the likely killer, a young man from Queensville, aged 19 to 26, with a history of minor offenses like fires or voyeurism. Although Paul didn't match most traits, detectives focused on the few that did. On April 22nd, they decided to arrest him. Paul denied any involvement. He remained in jail awaiting trial. Christine's parents were devastated. They could hardly believe their neighbor might be responsible for such horror. The biggest issue in the case was the mother's statement that she came home at exactly 4:10 p.m. She was sure of it. She checked the clock as soon as she walked inside. According to investigators, Paul couldn't have arrived by then and would have needed at least 15 to 20 more minutes. They repeatedly asked if she might be mistaken. Eventually, she admitted she could have arrived a bit later, and that was enough for the police. At trial, the prosecution tried to portray Paul as an odd, isolated young man who made neighbors uncomfortable. They argued he had enough time because the mother's timing was wrong. A psychologist testified that the entire family showed signs of covering for Paul. One of the most dramatic moments was the testimony of an undercover officer placed in Paul's cell. He claimed Paul discussed details of the crime, including the cause of death, details that were already published in newspapers. Paul also talked about his favorite movie, The Shining, quoted lines from it, and insisted he was innocent. Despite how influential this testimony seemed, the evidence remained questionable. The prosecution emphasized Paul's strange behavior, but the case lacked real proof. The jury ultimately found the evidence insufficient and declared Paul not guilty. He was released, though the prosecution immediately filed for an appeal. Christine's family was devastated. They still had to live next door to the man accused of killing their daughter. Her father said their life had been hell since the day she died, and now the torment would continue. Many residents of Queensville were also unhappy with the verdict. As preparations for the appeal began, new issues surfaced. The expert who claimed the fiber match had actually tested a sweater made of the same color and material, not Christine's real clothing. And when the new trial approached, most of the evidence had mysteriously vanished. The fibers, the hairs, several of Christine's bones, and even the cigarette butt found near her body. This forced the court to reconsider the case entirely. Despite everything, the new trial began. The prosecution presented a new theory, suggesting that Paul had noticed Christine with her tape recorder. He played his instrument. The music caught her attention. She walked closer, and then he forced her into his car, drove her away, and took her life. Even though this theory was weak, in July 1992, the jury found Paul guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison. After the second trial, public opinion began to shift. The media questioned whether Paul could really be innocent, and a group of concerned citizens joined forces, determined to challenge the verdict. Paul's lawyer filed an appeal, and he was released on bail. Nearly $500,000. His parents had to mortgage their home just to pay it. The lawyer pushed for a new DNA test. This time, experts examined Christine's underwear. Earlier attempts had failed. But now, with improved technology, they obtained a clear DNA profile. It did not match Paul. The revelation caused shock. Paul had spent 1.5 years in prison, years in court, and his life had been torn apart by investigators who tried to fit the evidence to their theory. In January 1995, 10 years after Christine's body was found, all charges against Paul were dropped. He later won $1.2 million in compensation, and some officers who fabricated evidence faced legal consequences themselves. This case became a turning point in Canada's legal history, forcing changes in the system to prevent a tragedy like this from happening again. After Paul was cleared, the investigation into Christine's murder was reopened. A new team of detectives began working, using the preserved DNA sample of the real killer. Hundreds of men were tested, and every single one was ruled out. But the first investigative team had lost crucial evidence and had never conducted a proper investigation. Believing from the start that Paul was guilty, Canadian journalists continued digging, uncovering leads pointing to several potential suspects. In 2019, 35 years after the murder, the case was reopened again. A new detective decided to use genetic genealogy, working with a company in the United States. By tracing the family trees of distant relatives and examining nearly 400 people, they finally identified the most likely suspect. It was Hoover, a close friend of Christine's family. He was 28 at the time, married, with children, and Christine's parents had known him for years. Just days before the crime, Christine's mother visited their home. Hoover's wife knew Christine would be home alone that day, and Hoover could have overheard that. Christine trusted him. She could have followed him or gotten into his car without fear. His name never appeared in the case files because the police accepted his wife's words as an alibi. In reality, he had every opportunity to commit the crime. But there was a problem. Hoover had died in 2015. Still, the detective located a preserved blood sample. When Hoover's DNA was compared to the killer's, it matched completely. He was the real murderer. Christine's parents were stunned. They had never imagined someone so close could be responsible. Her family was devastated, knowing Hoover had lived freely with his family. without facing justice. Hoover's wife told reporters she had never suspected anything. Paul said learning the truth didn't change much. He had lost nearly 10 years to courts and prison, and even after being cleared, many people still believed he was guilty. In the end, this case destroyed not only Christine's life, but also the life of an innocent man.